Hello, welcome to our presentation on libraries with shared spaces. I'm Ann Miller from the Wilberg Memorial Public Library of Osceola.
And I'm Heather Wiarda from the Amery Area Public Library.
So just a little bit about myself first. I started working at the Osceola Public Library in 2008. I started as a library assistant and then eventually became the circulation manager, and then last year became the library director. And then a little bit about our library. Osceola is located on the St. Croix River, about an hour northeast of the Twin Cities. And we are located right in the village of Osceola, and our population of the village is 2,826, but our entire service population is 8,580.
So I started working at the Amery Area Public Library almost 10 years ago, and it started on the circulation desk and then became the adult services librarian, and then 2 years ago became the director. So our library is very close to Ann's library in Osceola. We're about 25 minutes east, and our population is 2,962 with a service population of just over 11,000.
So for Osceola, we had a kind of a long journey to a shared space, but to start with, compared to most Wisconsin libraries, or many, Osceola is fairly new to the library game. So our first library came to fruition in 1966 in 2 rooms in the Osceola Hotel. But not long after that, it moved into what is now known as the Emily Olson House and was in that location for several years. But in 1990, the library moved to the location at 102 Chieftain Street after the building was donated to become the library. By the time I started in 2008, the collection was outgrowing the building, event space was lacking, and the building was not up to ADA standards. So between 2008 and 2012, there were several different efforts for a new building or a remodel of the current building that were stopped before getting too far. Next slide. So this is the exterior of our previous building at 102 Chieftain Street. While we had outgrown this building, it was in a great location next to a park, which made for a great place to host summer programming. This building was between 3,000 and 4,000 square feet. Next slide. So these are just a couple of pictures from inside that building. On the left, it shows the children's area, and on the right, the adult section. Next slide. And then there was what we referred to as the upstairs. This is part of what made it not ADA compliant. There were 4 steps to get up into this space. We used this space towards the end of its life as a young adult, and I think local history was up there, as well as we would use it for programming for YA and children's events. Next slide. So this shows you, this is one of the programs that we had when we would have programs in here. You can see the computer behind the woman in the orange shirt. Those were our public computers. So often when we had programming, we would have to shut down public computer uses. The circulation desk is to the left side of the screen, and so oftentimes that kind of hindered people being able to check items out. Next slide. Another one probably would have upset the fire marshal if they had seen this picture. There were times where we had really popular programs that we would have over 100 people packed into this space. Next slide. So in 2011, the Friends of the Osceola Library and the Library Board began working together for a new library building. In 2012, after hiring an architect, it was decided to pull back from the library-only building, as what was needed was a multi-use building for the library, village hall, and police department. After this decision was made, the Mill Pond Learning Foundation came into being to both fundraise for the library portion of the building and do all of the planning of the new building and the spaces inside the building. So kind of before I get further into this, I want to say hindsight is 2020. So every decision that was made at the time was thought to be the best decision in that moment. I think looking back, though, probably all parties involved in the new building would have done things very differently. And I have to say, in the end, we still have a very beautiful library and building that is 3 times the size of our previous library. Um, the village board and the library board both signed MOUs with the Mill Pond Learning Foundation. And I think this is probably the decision that many people would travel back in time to change if they could. It's something that the MOUs needed to be different because having a third party making all of the decisions on a building project and fundraising probably wasn't the best idea. So the only staff on the Mill Pond Learning Foundation was the library director, and the only village staff was the village administrator. Communication was a struggle with this group throughout the process. Patrons would come into the library wanting to know how fundraising and the project were going, but library staff, we rarely had the answers for their questions. Many things that should have been included in the library were left out, not only in the library, but also in the other village departments like the police department too. Next slide. So in the end, this is our new building. We're only 2 blocks away from where our old building was. So this is at 310 Chieftain Street in Osceola. And in this picture, the actual library itself is on the right side of the screen. So all of the windows to the right are library. Next slide. And the new library, we tripled that size. It is 10,788 square feet. So this does not include other meeting rooms within the building that our patrons are able to use. But so this is looking into our library from the front doors of the library. And you're looking through the adult section and towards the circulation desk. And then the yellow room is our quiet reading room. And that houses our reference materials, local history and Wisconsin collection, a microfilm reader. The furniture maker, Gustav Stickley, was actually born in Osceola. So we knew we had one chance to purchase Stickley furniture for this room to honor that connection. Next slide. So here is a seating area that's just outside of that quiet reading room. We have a fireplace there, and then you can see the periodical area along with another seating area. Adult graphic novels are on the back side of that shelving unit, and then on the front side, it is our hold pickup shelf. And then the circulation desk, you can kind of see the corner of it there. There's a self-checkout station there. And then we have adult public computers and then our printer and fax machine. Next slide. So this is the hallway connecting the adult area to the children's area. And down that hallway, we have science fiction on the right side of the hallway. And then there's a countertop for people to use, along with a gallery wall above that countertop. So we invite area artists in to display their works, and we usually have their works up for about a month. And then on the right side of that is the adult audiovisual materials. And then you can kind of see the green room beyond those materials. And then the picture on the right side is the young adult area. And so we have all of their collections in there, as well as a Switch gaming system and computers for the teens to use in that space too. Next slide. So this is a view of our children's area. We have flip bins for picture books. Juvenile fiction is on shelving over kind of along that orange wall, as well as nonfiction, and then videos and audiobooks. And there is a really nice countertop with a sink in it for storage for supplies for the children's area. Next slide. And then this is just the reverse view, looking the other direction. So we're standing next to the cabinets looking out. We have several different size heights of tables for different age groups to be able to sit at. The doors along that gray wall are our staff break room, my office, and then the youth services office. And then you see we actually have pretty much a whole wall of windows, and that's on the east side of the building. And then on the other side of that is the terrace. And so it's a well-used space during the summer months. We usually have a sensory table out there, sidewalk chalk. So after story time, it's a buzzing place out on the terrace. Our staff likes to eat lunch out there when it's not too hot. And then I also will have one of the book discussions when we meet in the evenings. We will often meet out there if it's not raining in the summertime. Next slide. So these are just kind of all of the elevations of our building to show you where all of the mixed use comes in. So again, there's that front west elevation looking at mainly the public library entrance. You can enter any of the doors and get to any of the other spaces. So nothing is closed off from one another. Everything is open to get to throughout the building. So on the south side, that's kind of the main entrance into the village hall and the police department. You can see there's a garage door all the way to the left side of that south picture, and that is the police department garage. So their vehicles are down there, although they do let us store our book bike down there in the winter, so we don't have to have that in the library all year round. And then also the Friends of the Library have a room down there with the yellow kind of sign in it. That's the Friends room. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then on the north elevation is the senior center. So their area is all the way to the left of the picture, those windows there. And then there's a large meeting room, the kind of more central large window space. And then the east elevation is that's the terrace and the children's area of the library. Next slide. So, excuse me. So this is the main picture in the center is right when you come in the very front doors under that big public library signage on the front of the building. And then if you turn and look to the left is that space where you can see some tables and a few people. So that's kind of a waiting area. A lot of people will sit there and study. There's Wi-Fi, of course, throughout the building. And so it's very well used that way. And then to the right is we have a couple of different booths areas. So there's 2 here, and then there's 3 more booths further down the hallway. And those are very well used. I was kind of surprised. Usually there are people in those. So I was pleasantly happy that I could take a picture without people in it and bother them. On the top left corner there, down this hallway, the Osceola Historical Society has a display that they change out quarterly. It's very popular. When new displays go up, people always stop to check and see what is up there. So that's a lot of fun. And then we also have like our community and library bulletin board in that hallway. Next slide. And then as you continue down that hallway, you would come to the doors to the large multi-use meeting room. So this room is used for the boardroom, for board meetings, for the polling location for the village. It's a meeting room for anyone who wants to reserve it. It's also used as the courtroom. kind of unfortunately, in our opinion, the dais and the railings are permanent fixtures. I think if we had had a little more say in this, we would not have had a permanent dais, because it really limits the space in the room. And I know it makes it difficult for when they do elections, it kind of cramps things up for them too. But it's a very nice space. It has screens and the capability to plug into them, and I think project on 4 screens total in that room. So that is very nice. And then as you continue on down further, you to the left of that center picture would be the entrance that had the senior center above it, is the senior center space. And this is kind of a, I don't want to say hotly contested area, but when they were doing this room or this space, the village received a grant for specifically for the senior center space. And what we did not know until after we had actually moved into the building and we were doing a tour with the village administrator at the time was that because of this grant, we could not use that space for 5 years. It was only to be used by people who were 55 years and older. So to all of a sudden, we had been making plans that we could maybe use some of this space during story time or craft programs or food programs. There was a lot of things we were hoping to be able to do in this space. And all of a sudden that was gone from us. But included in that then were 2 small meeting rooms. That shows one of them there that we would not be able to use either. Go ahead, next slide. So this is inside the senior center rooms. Again, they have a screen that you can plug into, that's not on in this picture, but they do get a lot of use out of this, and it's a really good place for the seniors. They do play cards a couple times a week. There's Tai Chi classes and yoga classes that they do in here. So it is a great space for the seniors, and I'm glad they do have it. I just wish that we would have known that ahead of time that we would not be able to use it. And then the window kind of on the far side in between the 2 doors leads into the kitchen. And so this is the kitchen that they have there. And I'm guessing the seniors would probably tell you to that they want to get rid of the oven and the stove because they're a little complicated. So they don't like those, but it is a nice space, and hopefully we will be able to work something out with them now that the 5 years is up. Next slide. So then this is the Village Hall and Police Department entrance. And you can see the Village Hall offices are behind those windows there. I think, it's a lot nicer than what they had previously. So I think they're happy with that. I think there are some things, of course, they probably would have done differently too. Next slide. And then right next to that village office is then the police department office. And so that's right there. And then there are 2 small meeting rooms downstairs. And so the library handles the scheduling for the meeting rooms. So we get all those calls. And it's a little bit strange. At the moment, we're not charging anybody. Our policy states that like if a business is using it, it should be charged. But because there was this lack of communication, no one really knows where that money is supposed to go. And so not long after we moved into the building in 2018, we stopped trying to take money from people because no one really wanted to decide how to handle the money. And we just at the library felt like we don't want to deal with money if we're not getting the money. So next slide. And then, excuse me, this is the just around the corner from that village entrance. So that room behind the book drop and bill drop is actually the Friends of the Library room. And as you can see, there is actually a window there, and it is a drive up window. So it's like going, if you were going to the bank. This was a big point of contention. This was something that at one point the library had talked about having. And then we had kind of decided no, because it's on a whole different level of than the library. So it would be a lot of going up and down to try and use this. And how would we use it? What would we do with it? And so we had kind of thought it was not going to happen. And we came over during building one day, and here was this window. Um, but when COVID hit, this was how we were able to um, get our patrons their materials contact free. So we actually, um, the shelving unit that's closest to the window was actually our hold shelf. So we put all of our holds on there. People would drive up, give us their card. We would have one person that was in the room at all times when we were open. And then we would, they could put their stuff in the book drop and pick up their new holds that they wanted to get. I referred to it as the Fortress of Solitude. It was kind of great to be in down there. You could get a lot of work done. So it was nice. But this is where the Friends of the Library store all of their books for their book sales. They have a monthly book sale. Next slide. So they just had one this past weekend. So I grabbed a couple of pictures. So they actually pull everything out of that room that isn't on shelves right in the room, and then use the two small meeting rooms and the hallway to set up their book sales. And they're really pretty popular. They are making quite a bit of money and supporting us. So go ahead.
All right. So Amery's journey to a shared space. In summary, it was a surprise to the library that we were moving, and it was not a choice necessarily that we were moving. So in January of 2020, the Amery City Council announced that the space the library used to be in was being sold and that the library would be moving. The city was concerned about a large HVAC repair that needed to take place in the current location. That's around $450,000 to repair. And there were other repairs needed at City Hall, which was located in a completely different building. So the city had made a plan to purchase an old bank on our main street and renovate it. And they wanted to turn it into a shared city center with City Hall, the council chambers, the Amery Economic Development Corporation, the Historical Society, the police department, and the library. So as I'd mentioned before, the announcement was a surprise to the library director at the time and the library board. And this decision kicked off a true firestorm of public debate and internal conflict between the city council, the library board, the library director, the citizens of Amery. The move would result in a total loss of space for the Historical Society and a reduction of about 60% in the Friends of the Library book sale space. So the director, the library board, citizens, they spent a lot of time and energy opposing the move and the way that the process was conducted. City council meetings were really tense for a long time. They were packed with citizens that had questions, complaints. They were angry, concerned about the cost. It seemed to come out of the blue to a lot of people. So there was a lot of anger and distrust because of it. Transparency between all parties and communication amongst all the parties were two of the biggest points of tension throughout this process. So this is a picture of the exterior of the old library space, 225 Shoal Court. The building was about 22,000 square feet, so quite large. I put in a few other stats about our registered users, a little over 3,500, total circulation at the time, a little over 46,000, and we had just a hair over 6 total FTE. This building that you can see had a drive-up book return, and the main entrance was located underneath that awning. It was part of the Amery Hospital and Clinic, so they had a portion of the building that they used for clinic purposes, and there is another section of the building that was used by the police department. So here are some pictures of the interior of our old space. When you walked in, you would encounter the lobby with the magazines, restrooms for the public and for the staff. On the right is a picture of our programming space. It was a little bit awkward. It was an L-shaped room, so it wasn't always easy to handle large crowds. And I just wanted to point out that this was 2020 when these pictures were taken, so the decor and the colors were a little dated, and the library was starting to show its age. It had been in there for quite a few years. So the picture on the left is the view from the circulation desk, and there's new releases and adult fiction towards the back. You can see the glass display case in the right on the foreground. DVDs were to the left. And then on the right, you can see those DVDs and just a close-up of the new releases. And if you look all the way towards the back of the photo, it leads you towards the youth services area. So here are our public computers. There were 4 stand-up desks and about 8 seated desks. There were some tables for workstations in the windows. There's a lot of light in this building. And on the right was a very large children's play area. That was probably one of the most popular uses of the library, was families and parents would come in and spend hours playing in this area. Then on the left, you can see our juvenile fiction and nonfiction collection. And then on the right, we had a fireplace and some seating around the fireplace, which is really nice and cozy during the winter. And then these pictures show our young adult area. So the pillar on the left is where our seating was. We did have a sign that asked people that weren't young adults to stay out because we wanted to keep it for kids only. In the very back of the picture on the left, you can see some glass doors, and that is the entrance to the story time room. Then the picture on the right shows the young adult area, and then the shelves in the background are all of the adult nonfiction collection. So now here, connected to the picture book area, is the baby play space and the board books. And then on the right was our story time room, which was closed off unless story time or special programs were happening. So it wasn't usually accessible to the public. So again, the newspaper, social media, people's conversations in the buildings and on the sidewalk were full of a lot of anger and blame and questions and accusations. It truly became a public relations disaster for all parties involved. Tensions were really high between the director and the board and the city council, and it was just not a very fun environment because of the move, the surprise of the move, and citizens' feelings about the move. Regardless, the purchase of the bank went forward and construction began at the end of 2020. And then January 2022, the library closed at its current location and then had its grand opening in the new location on February 12th. So we were closed for just over a month. By that time, I was the interim director, and we were really excited that we got the move done in a month because it was quite an undertaking. So here is the picture of our new shared space. This is 104 Maple Street. The total cost of the renovations was $4.6 million. The library square footage was almost 15,000. Registered users, 3,100. Total circulation as of last year was up to 69,500. And then we've added some hours, so we had a total FTE of 7.15. In the picture, you're viewing the south entrance of the building. So if you go in those doors, you will encounter the court chambers, which are also the council chambers, and City Hall. And on the north side of the building is the entrance to the library and the police department. So when you walk into the building on the main floor, you'll run into our circulation desk. It says welcome. We've got a nice big desk. We love the space. And then also on the right, we have a lounge with some free coffee. People read newspapers, magazines, visit. On that same floor is the mystery, romance, Western, puzzle collection. Magazines are on the far left. And then on the other side of the lounge, on the right-hand side, you'll see the new releases, the Library of Things, our large print collection, and our audio-visual collection. We also have the Holds Pickup location and a self-checkout station. And then this mural, we absolutely love it. It was given to us by the Amery Women's Club, and it was designed as a paint-by-number style community mural. So it shows Amery's history, Amery's present, landmarks of the city, and it is visible as soon as you walk in the door. So it's one of the centerpieces of our new building. To the right is part of our public computers. There is another bank on the opposite side that's not in the picture. So our new building has 3 meeting/study rooms. The first one on the left, it's our vault room. It actually was the vault building of the bank. So they pulled out all of the old banks and lockers, and then they turned this into a meeting room. And it seats up to 20 if you're in a classroom setup. Otherwise, about 12 comfortably around tables. Then on the right side is our main floor study room. It has a smart TV and a whiteboard. The vault room also has a smart TV and a whiteboard. And then what was new for us was a library on 2 floors. So our old space was 1 level with the option of going into the basement for the Friends sale or the Historical Society, but no circulation, no collection downstairs. In this building, we occupy part of the main floor and all of the lower floor. So the picture on the left shows when you come into the lobby, you can turn left and either take the elevator or the stairs to get to the lower level. And then once you get down there, one of the first rooms you see is our STEM room, which is very heavily used. People love it. Those are 2 young men that go to the Amery School District who were using the Rigamajig, which is one of the most popular toys in the library. One of the best things about this space is our makerspace/storytime room. So you can see this is a very large room. It's got carpet in spaces, tile on one side. It's got a full kitchen with an oven, a refrigerator, a microwave, countertops, sink. And then storytime usually happens on the carpeted area, and then crafts and messy things happen on the tiled area. It's a really large space. It's got high ceilings, lots and lots of light. I think one of the main concerns of the public when they heard that we were moving and occupying part of the basement was that it was going to be really dreary, really dark, and really unpleasant to visit. But I think these pictures show that that's not the case. So we also have our entire youth services collection downstairs. We've got the juvenile materials, and then opposite the walkway, there's picture books and easy readers. The picture books, you can't see the whole collection in this picture, but it's a large open U shape. And then we have a separate baby room, which is much larger than the old baby room station. And it has big windows, lots of toys. All of our board books are stored there. And it has a half door, which parents love because if they need to step out to the restroom or grab something off a shelf, they can close the door, but you can still see over it and see that everybody's okay. And then another really fun addition to our space is our library dragon. I don't know if you can make it out there sitting on one of the walls in the garden that is visible through the basement window. So there's a huge bank of windows in the basement that looks out to the outside, and it brings in a lot of sun, a lot of daylight. So next to the picture books is the young adult space. Here's 2 different views. It's also set up in a U shape, and they've got their own seating with a table and a charging station and several chess tables, which are usually occupied. So then you have to go up a ramp to get to the rear part of the basement where most of the adult collection is housed. On the way, you can stop in the Friends book sale room, the picture on the right there. So their room is much smaller, but I would also argue that it's much more organized, it's much neater, and it's a really pleasant space to shop. Here we have adult nonfiction and then adult fiction. And then on the right is another view of the adult fiction that shows the science fiction and fantasy. And on the right-hand side, you can just make out a table that we keep stocked with puzzles, and there's a coffee station there as well. Here's another view of the adult fiction, and then our study room in the lower level, which holds about 4 people. And here we are, pros and cons. Anne, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So, one of the cons that we had was with public relations. The non-library users in our community, to this day still refer to the building as the palace and really think that it was unnecessary.
Mm.
And a lot of this stems from the financial impact that I'll talk about, a little bit further down in our cons. So Heather, what kind of cons did you have with public relations?
Well, it was the worst part of the whole situation was the strained relationships, which the public relations led to strained relationships, tied into our next con. There was just a lot of anger, a lot of mistrust. It was not fun to go to council meetings. It was not fun to talk to people about what was going on at the library because there was so much anger in the community over what happened. And I think those public relations missteps on everybody's side, I would have to say that, like you said, Anne, hindsight is 2020. And if you could use your Wayback Machine and do some things differently, I think everybody could have done a better job of handling their differences and airing their grievances. It became really heated, and I think everyone could have done more to get to solutions versus focusing on what everyone was angry about.
Yeah, so for us, for strained relationships,
Mhm.
initially when we all moved into the building, the relationship between the village staff and the library staff were really strained because
Mhm.
the village staff was under the impression that the library had planned the building, and that they didn't really get what they needed in their spaces because of the library. But in reality, again, it was the Mill Pond Learning Foundation that planned the building and did all of the fundraising for the building. So that was definitely an issue to start out with. Heather?
Yes. And I've touched on the strained relationships already, but it was especially tense between library people and government people. So city council and the mayor versus the library board and the library director. It really became an us versus them situation instead of a this is what we need to do and this is how we're going to do it together and we're going to make a plan and share it out to the public cohesively. So I would say, from my perspective, I wasn't the director at the time, but from my perspective, it seemed like it was the lowest point in relations between the library and the local government.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our strained relationships came from that lack of communication that we had.
Yes.
So from the get-go on this project, the Mill Pond Learning Foundation were the gatekeepers of the information for the project. And they were very slow in sharing that information with library staff. And of course, the library staff are the people that are dealing with the public on a daily basis. So that was really frustrating for us.
Yes.
When they did share information, so the first time that they came out with architectural renderings of the new building and space, it was actually a 3-story building with the library on all 3 stories. So we as library staff, when we saw this, were really unhappy about that and did not understand the logic of why they would do something like that. And we're fairly vocal about it, amongst ourselves to the point that they actually brought some of us in for a meeting and kind of told us to suck it up and change happens. So kind of at that point, we were like, okay, this is just, we're just going to have to deal with whatever comes. It ended up 6 months down the line, they brought someone in to do fundraising who is, a leader in the business community in our community. And he basically said, I can't sell this particular plan to people that we're going to try and get funds from. And so immediately they started changing the design of the building, which was then, if they had initially listened to library staff 6 months previously, they could have been 6 months ahead of where they were. So yeah, so that was a lack of communication. Not knowing where fundraising was a huge issue. A lot of times communities will put up that thermometer in the window or something to indicate where they're at with fundraising. That was something that Mill Pond didn't ever do. So kind of the everyday person had no idea where they were with fundraising. And I think they probably lost out on a lot of potential donors had they known where fundraising was. Yeah. How about you,
Sure.
Heather?
Very much the same. There was a real lack of communication from the people who were planning the building space, who were designing the remodel. The library was hoping to occupy the main floor of the bank because there was a smaller section downstairs and a smaller section upstairs that the director and the library board at the time thought would be better served for the groups that had less patrons or less people coming in and out, the police department and City Hall. But City Hall really wanted to be on part of the main floor. And so the architects decided to put the library onto two separate floors, which overall is really nice. It's beautiful. We have a lot of space. We have a lot of windows. We did have to figure out how to staff two floors at one time, and we didn't want any staff member working alone on one floor. So it affected how we thought about providing service since we suddenly had double the circulation desks that we used to. It also felt like there was a sense of reluctancy on the part of the planners to share information with the library and the library board and library staff about where are things going to go. All we were told was, you'll have the basement, you'll have part of the main floor, and we won't be moving any walls. So you need to figure out how to fit your collection into the space, into the footprint that we gave you, which explains why our collection is kind of broken up a little bit unusually. I don't think it's common to choose to have half of your adult collection downstairs and half of it upstairs. But because of the building space, because of floor load, we had to split things up the way that it would fit. So it was difficult to figure out how to make the library work the way we thought best when we weren't getting a ton of information at first. It did gradually improve over time, but in the beginning, there were so many questions that I think it just added to that strained relationship and frustration and sense of anger.
So, Osceola, as I mentioned, there was some negative financial impact because the Mill Pond Learning Foundation did their fundraising. But when the building was all completed, of course, there's always overages. And Mill Pond felt that they had met their commitment to the project, even though it wasn't going to cover everything and all of the costs that had come up. So in the end, taxes had to be raised to cover the cost of the building. And that really angered a lot of the citizens. I think probably the people that are patrons of the library understood and probably didn't have that kind of anger. But, as in any community, there are people who just don't use the library. And those, of course, are the people who are most upset about their taxes going up for this project. And then the other thing, because of that need to raise the taxes, then the village decided not to increase our allocation for 6 years. So as everyone in dealing with budgets in libraries knows, of course, when your funding is kept flat, it's still a decrease in your budget because you're still going to have to pay more for supplies. You're going to have to, you need to pay your employees and you need to give them cost of living increases. So that money has to come out of somewhere. And so then usually it ends up coming out of programming and materials, and which is what happened with us. Um, Fortunately, things are looking up with the village, and we will actually be seeing our first increase in 2025 from the village allocation. So we are excited about that. But it's, again, kind of one of those things that if you're working with a third party, doing these things, make sure that everyone understands exactly what that fundraising commitment is and that things do change during the building process.
Yeah. So for Amery, I think the hardest part financially was that Amery had to pay for part of the moving bill to actually physically move our collection, our furniture, our bookshelves into the new location. And I know that the board at the time was of the opinion that the city should pay for our move since we didn't ask to move and we were forced to move. I know everybody had different opinions about that specific piece, but we did end up spending a chunk of our fund balance money to pay for the move. So again, that just caused some public relations problems. It strained relationships again. It was based on a lack of communication. So it's all tied together.
Yeah, and one of the things that we found is having a shared space is kind of the uncertainty of roles within the building. Who exactly is going to do what? Again, for us, it's kind of been the meeting rooms. So the library itself doesn't have any meeting rooms within it. All of the meeting rooms are within the building, but outside of the library space itself. So we generally are the ones that do most of the scheduling for them. But again, trying to figure out, if something is damaged in the room or it's not cleaned, who is going to take care of that? Um, when we can, we try and call whoever had been in the room and deal with it that way. But there's still we're a bunch of introverts. And so, the worst thing that we can probably think of is having to confront somebody about something that happened in one of the rooms. Um, but that's kind of where we're at with roles and hopefully trying to work through that in the very near future.
Yes, I agree. So for Amory, one of our biggest questions about this uncertainty of roles within the building, it was built around maintenance. Who shovels the sidewalk? Who puts ice melt out? When do they do it? What happens if a faucet is leaking? So who's in charge of maintenance? Who do we contact if we need something? Is it the public works director? Is it one of the city crew that we see frequently? There was just nothing really spelled out regarding who does what and who pays for what. So maintenance was and still is one of the bigger questions.
And I'm sure as everyone is aware, any building project is incredibly stressful, whether it's a remodel or, building a brand new building. So it's a lot of stress through the whole process. And then, trying to figure out all of these things afterwards. And so I would say if there are things that you can do ahead of time and sit down with all of the tenants of the building ahead of time, to kind of ward off some of that stress and have some of those discussions and communication before moving in would probably be helpful.
Yes, I also couldn't agree more. It was extremely stressful for everyone involved. Planning a move, I had become the interim director somewhat unexpectedly and suddenly after our director had to move because of a personal tragedy. And I had about 4 days to learn about becoming a director, and then I was handed the building project, and we were moving in about 4 months. So I can't overstate how hard it is to move, even under the best of circumstances. So, if anyone out there watching this is facing a move, make sure you take care of yourself and make sure you ask for help. Make sure that you lean on absolutely everyone you can lean on because it will be hard no matter what. Even the best version will be extremely hard. And I know and you and your staff experienced a lot of stress. We experienced a lot of stress. We lost a lot of staff during this time period. So um, I wouldn't wish that level of stress on anyone, but just be prepared if you are facing a move or planning for a move, even if it's for good reasons and you're happy about it. Shall we move to the next slide, Anne?
I think so.
Okay.
So while we had plenty of cons, there are a lot of pros to being in a multi-use building. And I think one of the things that we love is we have a brand new library. I mean, it's 6 years old now, but to us, that's still brand new. And it's a beautiful space. So people coming into the library for the first time almost always comment on what a beautiful space we have. And those who had used the library previously will comment, of course, on the size difference and the openness of the new library and the fact that we have seating. I mean, I think in our old library, we had maybe 2 chairs that you could sit at and a table. So just having a brand new library with lots of space is amazing.
Yeah, I personally found our old library space pretty unattractive and it was showing its age. There were ceiling tiles that had watermarks. The carpet was cleaned on a regular basis, but was just worn and stained. I didn't care for the decor, for the colors. It just wasn't a beautiful, wonderful space to be in. And people were so worried about leaving the old space that they thought was beautiful and wonderful. It had its perks for sure. But like you said, Anne, when people walk into the new library space, they're in awe. There is so much sunlight, there's so much windows, there's plenty of seating. It's really inviting and welcoming and clean and fresh. So the move for us turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to us. We've got a beautiful building. And as we're going to talk about, there's other things that happened that were fabulous.
So strengthened relationships, we talked about a little bit how there were strained relationships, but I think by being in our multi-use building with the village hall, that's really strengthened our relationships with the village. So the village hall is downstairs. I've developed a wonderful working relationship with both the village clerk and our village treasurer. It's great whenever I have a question about my budget or my numbers or anything. I can just run downstairs and ask her any questions I have about those things. And, it helps us to like kind of keep tabs on our numbers together. And I think that's part of why, the village decided to increase our allocation for this next year. So while they started out strained, it's been really great to develop those relationships and strengthen them.
Exactly the same for Amery's situation. It was really hard for quite a while, but being in the new building, my effort to attend every single city council meeting and committee meetings and the just being spatially close to each other has made a huge difference. I get to see the clerk treasurer or the city admin every day if I need to. Whereas in the old location, when they were in a separate building, you'd maybe see somebody once every few months. So having that personal connection and sharing a space really truly does build relationships. We have a really great relationship between the library and the police department. They're upstairs as opposed to being in another portion of our old building. And we collaborate on programs and events all the time. We go to things that they host, they come to things that we host. And we've just never had such good ties. So, once again, the thing that at one point everyone thought was the worst thing that could happen to the library has turned out to be the best thing that could happen to the library.
Yep. And I would have to say, even though there are still people in our community who grumble about our building, our public support has probably never been higher. Every month we have new patrons, and, you know, lots of new patrons. So it's fabulous. We have, families that come in weekly. We have several families that come in multiple times a week, and really do support our library. Our friends group is as strong as ever and really gives us that support in our community too. And I think, as we're strengthening those relationships, with our, other tenants in our building, um, they are giving us more support too. So like with the senior center, they have a monthly potluck, and we often are asked to come and do a presentation for them during that time. And so it's nice to have that support and, just the love we feel from these people. So it's great.
Exactly. Amory feels the same way. Once we got through the move and we got people into the building and they saw how great it was and that it was actually an improvement. It's hard to imagine sometimes when change is being forced upon you that something could be better than what you have. So when people were able to see that this was a fabulous space and all of the staff worked hard on emphasizing all the great features of the building and what we loved about it, and that became infectious, and the public did buy in and support us. And our foot traffic is greatly increased from the old location, and people are really happy and really supportive. And that includes city council and city staff. Everybody has really come together in a way that I couldn't have imagined 3 years ago.
Yeah. And, they're the visibility for us is better. So we're unlike Heather, she's on a main street through town. We're only one block up off the main street, but the corner that we're on is a very high traffic corner, and so we're very visible that way.
Mhm.
I think the only thing that we're hoping that some point we can get done is actually get a, library this way sign on that main street, but because it's a state highway, there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through. And so we're going to keep working on it, but hopefully at some time we can at least get that visibility.
That's funny, Anne, because that is the same problem we have. We would love to have a library sign, even though we're right on our main street that goes through town, but it is a highway, a county highway, and we can't just throw one of those beautiful blue and white signs up anywhere. So we're grateful to be on the main drive through town. I know a lot of people were worried because the old building, even though it was tucked away and nobody would be able to find it if they didn't know it was there, it had a great big parking lot, which people loved. So our new building has a much smaller parking lot, but if you go through Amery, you cannot miss the fact that there's a city hall and a library there. So the visibility has really helped us.
Yep. And I would have to say that we have more foot traffic because we are in a multi-use building. So on days that court is in session, court's held right across the hallway from the library. We have people that come in looking for the village hall or police department who might not normally have stopped into the library, but now that they know that it's there, and it's like, wow, this is really cool. I didn't know, the library was like this. And so that's one definite benefit of being in a multi-use building.
Yes, for sure. We saw the same thing. Foot traffic up because people are looking for municipal court, they're looking for city hall, they're looking for the police department. Our police department is able to do some DMV work, so we get a lot of foot traffic for that kind of service. So the more people that come in and see it, the more people that become convinced that this really turned out well for us.
Yep. And then the costs for shared services. So the way we've done it is, they have a formula that they've figured out by square footage, and then the shared spaces, it's split between the different tenants. So we split utilities, we split cleaning services, but I also have to say, of course, just the cost of the building. So to build one multi-million-dollar building is going to be cheaper than trying to build multiple multi-million-dollar buildings. So of course, that is one definite benefit in cost sharing of being part of a multi-use building.
Yes, that's exactly the same with us. And I feel like we've probably benefited because since this is a city center, currently the city handles larger maintenance issues that otherwise we might have had to contract out for and pay for as the library. So we share pest control, we share the utility bills, we share window cleaning services. So being able to share that has lowered a lot of our utility type costs. Now, what we've learned.
So yeah, communication. I think if nothing else, everyone needs to be talking to one another about what is going into the building, how it's being done, and any kind of plans that you might have. One thing that I would definitely recommend, we've had a couple of different village administrators in since our building has been here, and one of them had started doing quarterly meetings with representatives from all of the tenant groups in the building. That way you could talk about any issues that people are experiencing in the building and what kind of resolutions you could have for those issues. So that I would say is something that if you're looking at a multi-use building to consider and think about, it's like, oh, well, let's, just have a meeting every now and then so we can talk about things that are happening in the building.
Yeah, I agree with Anne. At one point, with a past city administrator, there would be department head meetings that were similar to these tenant meetings. That hasn't happened in over a year, so I could see the benefit of reinstating that. And hopefully, our new city administrator, when they start working, will put that back into place. And yes, communication. I know people hear this all the time from everyone, but good communication is so key to having good relationships. And having good relationships help you communicate better. And when you can build trust and work towards a common goal, even if something is happening to you, as it happened with the Amery Library, I think if everybody took a step back and thought about what we're doing together and what we're trying to accomplish and really focused on positive communication, doesn't mean don't air grievances, and it doesn't mean don't speak up when you think something isn't right. But I think the way that you communicate and attempting to use some respect and compassion at all times will really take you far.
Well said, Heather. Very well
Thank you.
said. Um, so as far as getting an MOU before you occupy the building, we still really don't have an MOU. And I would have to say, even, going back to the Mill Pond Learning Foundation and the MOUs that they had with the village board and the library board, I have a friend who at the time was on the village board when this was occurring, and she said the MOU was way too thin. So if you do have something like that, make sure it's robust and is really going to be covering everything. I think, you know, again, if they had to do it again, they probably would not have done it this way. And they either would have had a much more robust MOU, or they would have done it a totally different way and maybe just had the foundation do fundraising, and the planning would be a committee of people actually involved in the library and involved in the village.
And it's exactly the same story for Amery. We do not have an MOU after multiple years of being in the building, and I ask on a regular basis to get one in place. Our past city administrator did write some up, but the committee that had met to look at those decided to start from scratch because none of them were quite right. And that was a good 6 months ago. So we still don't have one. And that MOU can really help in somewhat sticky situations. Like we had a leak in our building, and I wanted to bring in somebody to do some testing to make sure that the mold that was on the drywall where the leak was wasn't any sort of concerning type of mold or concerning level of mold. So I brought in a specialist, an environmental engineer, and I sent the bill to the city. This is their building. We're a tenant in it. And the mayor wasn't thrilled to get the bill. He didn't want to get the bill and he wanted to know why I thought that the city should pay for it. And I said, well, this is a perfect example of why we need an MOU so that we can spell out the city is responsible for major maintenance and upkeep, or the library is responsible for repainting when it is needed and cleaning the carpets and maintaining the bathrooms. All those little details that aren't in an MOU aren't a problem until they are a problem. And then someone is saying, hey, I don't know if I should be getting this bill. Maybe you should be getting the bill. So again, the MOU helps you communicate, and the MOU is based on communication. So I can't emphasize enough, get an MOU before you occupy the building if you can. It was not under consideration at all until we moved in, and then it was raised several times and disregarded. So it becomes a problem when there's a question. So absolutely, do what you can to get an MOU.
Yep, absolutely. Um, and then public and patron support. I think things would have gone very differently had the Mill Pond Learning Foundation communicated more with the public and provided us with more talking points for our patrons, and had that, fundraising thermometer up, or that gauge of where we were at, and could have had more public support for moving into this building. Um, yeah, our patrons are everything. There are all, that's why we are here, is for our patrons and the public. And so to have them kind of questioning why this building is happening is frustrating and disappointing. So yeah, you definitely want to have positive patron support.
Yes. My advice would be, if the move is happening to you instead of with you, still try to find ways to look to the positives, to assume the best about the people that are involved in the situation, to assume that everybody wants the best for the city and the best for the library, and steer the public conversation when you can towards the positives. We all know that social media is a vicious cycle, and if people latch on to some negative ideas and then everybody climbs onto that negative idea and adds more, it doesn't do anything to help the situation. I'm not saying that I would recommend glossing over tough conversations, but absolutely do what you can to find common ground and to steer the conversation towards the positives. And on that note, I would add, don't weaponize bad situations. If you find that a move is happening to you, it's justifiable to feel angry or upset or a loss of trust, but do everything you can to find a way to turn it into a better situation. Everyone was so upset about the library moving and about the Historical Society losing their space. Well, what ended up happening is the Historical Society raised funds and bought their own building and now have a proper museum that's 100 times better than the space they were borrowing in our basement. No one would have thought that would have happened when they first learned, we're moving and guess what? We don't have room for you. So I just want to emphasize, often something good will come out of the scenario, even if you can't see it at the time. Next slide.
So, well, we want to thank you for watching our presentation today. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Our emails are up on the screen here.
Yes, as you can tell, we have a lot to say about this, and we're happy to share our thoughts and our time with you. And if you are facing a move, hopefully it turns out to be as great for your libraries as it turned out to be for us.